Hello, my name is Mike Sexton. I'm the retired Vice President for Enrollment Management at Santa Clara University and a member of the My Footpath Advisory Board. I'm here today with two gentlemen who are hip deep in the throes of the 2024 recruitment year and have a special knowledge that we're going to share today. Dwayne and David, good to see you. And I'd like to first start out by asking you each to kind of give us a thumbnail of your institutions, location, demographics, interesting challenges going on.
David, you can go.
Sure. So I serve at California State University Northridge, lovingly known as CSUN. CSUN is located in the city of Northridge, which is in the San Fernando Valley, which is about 15 miles north of Los Angeles. So it's a very urban institution, a very urban area. We serve just about 38,000 students. We're primarily a commuter institution with about 3,200 students that live in residence, and the rest of our student population live off campus or with either independently or with their families. The majority population at CSUN are Latinx students, and so we are a Hispanic serving institution and have been, in Southern California since 1959. A couple other important notes: we are one of the largest Pell granting institutions in the nation, and we are like a number of other CSUs have been identified by the Wall Street Journal as being very effective in promoting social mobility for our students, creating a very diverse learning experience for all of the students that are enrolled at CSUN. We are also, as I mentioned, part of a system, so which Dwayne will talk about in a second as well. There's 23 campuses within the CSU system, and we are one of those universities.
Thank you. Dwayne.
So I am at California State University, Bakersfield. Bakersfield is about 100 miles north of Los Angeles, approximately. Unlike Los Angeles, Bakersfield is the big city in a rural area. So we're compared to a larger city, we're large in capacity, but it's really more of a rural area. We are in the San Joaquin Valley area of California, which is the largest producer of agriculture and food. We're also, Kern County was at one point the oil capital of California and the region of for sure. So we had lots of migration from Oklahoma, Texas, and the like to come to Kern County for oil back in the days. We had major oil companies were housed here. Some of those things have changed, but that's kind of the Kern County Bakersfield area. Lots of farm working towns. Lots of, like I said, agriculture and all that, hospitals, things like that. Nursing is huge in this area. Bakersfield, California State University, Bakersfield is the only four-year college campus within 100 miles of us. And then with us in our area is Bakersfield College, Community College, which interestingly, we're a smaller campus. We have about 10,000 students on our campus. Ironically, our community college is larger than we are. Actually, one of the larger of the community colleges in the state. So we have that juxtaposition. But where we are, again, social mobility is large like the other campuses in the CSU system. And we do serve our local area. One of our challenges, ironically, California is not very high on affordability. It's expensive to live in the state of California, except for areas like Kern County. So you have people who are leaving California areas, but they're moving to Kern County because the cost of living is much more affordable. So we have those things, and the reason why that's a challenge is because for students considering going to school, they may be able to just do 2 years and get a really good job and have a good career and do well in Kern County. Or they can work at a Chick-fil-A or something at 20 bucks an hour and still afford an apartment and a car and do what they want to do. So our challenge is really convincing people continually that there is high value in a college education. So we work against those things as well.
For people not familiar with California, the California state system is actually the largest public system in the United States with all its campuses. And the other fact is, you mentioned the community colleges, that we have 112 community colleges in the state. So it's a very different higher ed landscape when it comes to this. And what we're going to talk about today is the efforts, kind of unique efforts that you've successfully implemented to try to take students, in many cases, a lot of first-gen students, and get them feel as though this large institution, large to them, small to you, Dwayne, in the CSU system, to feel connected. And that's a unique issue, I think, for all of us at any size college, that initially, you know, admissions works for 2 years on this multi-level recruitment strategy. They enroll, they deposit, and we hand them off. And we hope that orientation and housing and academic advising, everybody else is going to give them the same love and care that we did in trying to get them in the door. And we know from data of retention and graduation rates, and I'll ask you to share some of that, that's not always successful. And you have a rather unique way that you've implemented some strategies. First, can you give us an idea about that pass-through rate of retention and graduation rates, Dave?
Sure. So that's changed since the pandemic, but we certainly have a comprehensive program in the CSU called GI 2025. And, you know, its purpose is to increase retention and graduation rates, both for first-time freshmen and what we call first-time transfer. And so, you know, for context, in the CSU system, in order to transfer mostly to one of our universities, you need to complete at least 60 units. We do have some institutions that admit students with fewer units, but in general, that's the requirement. And so there are specific targets for each CSU relative to retention and graduation rates. At CSUN, we've made, and I think across the system, we've made significant progress in both our 4-year and 6-year graduation rates for our first-time freshmen. Though we started at a very low number, and also we are a campus that educates a certain kind of student that a 4-year time frame doesn't always fit very well. But in terms of our first year or 4-year graduation rate, it went from just about 14%, and we're averaging now about 22-23% of those students that are graduating in 4 years. And then we're about 56% in terms of our 6-year graduation rate for our first-time freshmen. Our first-time transfer, they're graduating at about, in a 4-year time period from the time they start, there's about 81% of those students, which is right at where we were supposed to be. Retention has changed since the pandemic. So prior to the pandemic, we had about an 82% retention rate at CSUN, and that was pretty consistent over a 2 or 3 year period of time. But in the last 2 years, that's taken a dip. And some of that may have to do with the fact that, as Dwayne mentioned, we have a number of students that have decided, I can get work, and I can make a livable wage without having to return to school. And so we went from an 81% retention rate to a 76% retention rate. I think the other piece that's happening, and even though, as you mentioned, Mike, we've tried to make significant progress, there's a student success framework out there called institutional integrity. And it basically argues for a simple understanding, yet a very powerful and accurate understanding, that whatever promises we make during the recruitment phase need to be reflected and actualized in the student experience. And when there's, the larger the gap there is between that experience, the recruitment experience, and what is happening on campus, then you're more likely to experience some retention loss. Many of our students coming out of the pandemic and accessing online education have that same expectation when they come to a CSU, to CSUN, and in our context, we are still delivering the majority of our classes in person. We still don't have degrees that people can pursue fully online. And this is the case, I think, at most CSUs. And so all of those pieces, really not being able to match expectation, opportunities for employment that have increased since the pandemic. And I think then not being nimble enough and quick enough yet to match some of the expectations of online educational delivery that our students are expecting, I think, contributed to our decline in retention.
No, David just outlined that excellently, and our numbers are very, very similar. Our freshman 4-year graduation rate is 27.6%, and 6-year is 49.3%. Our transfer 2-year graduation rate is 44.4%, and 4-year is 72.3%. But let me say this for those who do not live in California, and I think this is important, because one might say, aren't you a 4-year college, and isn't the goal to graduate in 4 years? That would be true, but the California Community College is different in that many of our students work, and quite a few work full-time. And so it's a little bit different. We have another system in California that you didn't mention, and that's the University of California system. They are true to form that you are required to be a full-time student at that particular institution, whereas ours, you can go part-time, you can take one class. We have working adults who have families and children, so we have a different demographic, which speaks to our rates a bit. The other thing I would add as well, and what David said is perfect on all the other pieces, I would add the what we call the equity gap piece. That's something that we're working on in terms of not just graduation or retention, but what are some of those gaps? And that's a piece that we're working very hard on, trying to minimize the differences in graduation rates when you aggregate the data of those who are underrepresented students and what their graduation rate is versus others who are more well-resourced, and how we can bring those together where we can have more equality in the graduation rate. So that's another thing I wanted to mention.
Do I understand correctly that there's also a little bit of a carrot and a stick as far as the state system and the state budget about graduation rates, that they are expecting initiatives to increase that, or they're going to hold back funding? Is that on the table?
Well, I would answer that, and David, you could have a different perspective on this. I would say it this way. So this is also what's different about California. So anyone who comes to us from outside of California, we seem very different. So the way that it works on any university in the country, and any private university, even in California, is that the university itself will set its own targets of how many students you want, what you want your enrollment to look like, and dollars are attached to enrollments, right? In California, the system informs us of what our enrollment targets will be and funds us as such. So each campus is assigned, if you will, an enrollment target and funded at that level. So now what happens is if you don't meet that, and before, we were always, many of our campuses were over-enrolled. It's the California state system. We were doing fine. Since the pandemic, numbers have gone down. And so now what's happened is if you go below your funded target, you can be re-allotted a lower target, which means your funding will decrease. I very overly simplified that, David, but if you want to add to that, please do.
I think that's a great way of explaining it. And yeah, so to answer your question, Mike, what you're talking about, the relationship between graduation retention is embedded, and the funding associated is embedded in that target that each campus receives on an annualized basis. And yeah, I mean, it's a very different framework. It used to be that if you were over your target, you didn't get any state money for those enrollments that were over target, you only kept what you collected as an institution in terms of institutional tuition and fees. And that is now changed, at least for the time being.
And are there incentives or penalties having to do with graduation rate too, rather than just in the door?
No, it really is just a enrollment target, and then you have your GI 2025 goals, and there was funding allocated to each institution, depending on what they were pursuing, but there's no penalty if you don't reach those goals, other than now in this framework, if you don't reach your enrollment goal, then you potentially could see a reduced amount of funding coming to your institution.
Okay.
Which is interesting, and this is why I say it's fascinating for those who are coming from outside of the state, because I used to work with David at the Northridge campus, and so folks would always laugh who were coming in from outside, who would be provost or whomever, and we would say we want to make sure we don't go too far over our target. We don't want to over enroll. And they would say, "Is that a thing? You can actually over enroll?" And so, yeah, we definitely want to make sure that we do our best to adhere to our targets.
Got it. Well, certainly from a taxpayer's perspective, they also want to see students graduate too, right?
Yeah.
So there's a vested interest not only in enrollment management staff, but the university to retain and graduate for both the continuing net revenue and just for the state to give an educated workforce, not just people coming in the door. So at your institutions, what kind of initiatives or efforts did your office or other offices do? Because retention is kind of a hot potato, right? If you ask 10 people on campus at a lot of places, who's responsible for retention? You get 10 answers. Or the answer is everybody, which is, of course, means nobody. Mm-hmm. So who is the czar that helps you, spearhead retention efforts to get them to graduation?
Well, I would say what's helpful, I think, was having this graduation initiative 2025, which started in 2018, I believe is when it launched. And what that did was it brought an awareness and almost a mandate, if you will, for every campus, all 23 campuses, to come up with best practices, with systems, and reviewing barriers and other things that would help in these efforts. So there was I'm going to actually reverse something you just said, that is everybody's job, so to speak, because that was a change in mindset. It was a change in mindset to just having this thing of it's your department or your department who's responsible for making sure students have the experiences they have, to a mindset of, and I love how this was couched. We had to change from being from forcing, or not forcing, but having students have the mindset of being college ready students, to flipping that notion and saying, are we a student ready institution? And are we ready to support the student from the time we say, congratulations, you got in, to the time we say, congratulations, you graduated? And that is everybody's job. And we've had many workshops, sessions, and trainings that whether you're the person who's the groundskeeper and a student sees you being rude to them or something, to whether you're standing in line trying to buy a sandwich, anything that the student is experiencing, changing your university culture to have one of belonging, to have one, yes, it has to be academic. So we had numerous things in the academic side of the house and the student affairs experience side of the house, the engagement pieces that we have, and what the student and their well-being. So there's so many different elements that there isn't just one piece, but you have to have the president on board and other leaders and executive team members to say every division is going to have measures that are going to be assessed and have data collected on the student experience from the door to the graduation day. And so I think it isn't all hands, but it has to be a concerted effort and a measured effort.
Yeah, well said. And I think for CSUN, it's an interesting set of variables that kind of inform what I'm about to say. So as Dwayne mentioned earlier, CSUN and the CSU system, but CSUN in particular, has been over-enrolled for decades. And that resulted in some very poor practices, in part, but from a good intention. And what I mean by that is, CSUN has never wanted to be a place that excludes access or limits access to our educational facility. Therefore, we really resisted imposing impaction or higher admission standards for programs or for particular either full-time freshmen or full-time transfer. And even when we did, it was really reluctantly, because we wanted to create access. We weren't super committed to success, not because we didn't want to be, but in order to minimize the impact of being open in enrollment, you had to figure out how to let people go. And the way that happened is you just didn't serve them well. You didn't send them a lot of communication. You had a lot of unfriendly policies related to tuition payment and that kind of thing that whittled down the student population. So it's those that have resilience and persistence and are, committed to this journey. They engaged. Now, once they got on campus and were in the classroom and they engaged with student affairs and other kinds of resources, they found a very welcoming place, but it was not coordinated and coherent in terms of trying to create a consistent experience for all of our students. So that's, when GI 25 comes around, that's kind of where we were. And again, I'm reducing it, and I don't want to at all imply that we weren't interested in student success, but rather it just wasn't an institutional priority that was articulated, as Dwayne said, from the cabinet all the way through all of the different areas. That has significantly changed. Because we're measuring the things that matter, and not only retention and persistence and graduation rates, but how they differ by disaggregated populations. So we know, as Dwayne mentioned, there's significant equity gaps that persist. And so lots of activity on how do we address those? How do we understand them? How do we address them from a faculty perspective in terms of the classroom, but also from a belonging point of view? So, developing resource centers for different populations on our campus, whether it's veterans or Black students or Asian American students or LGBTQ plus students, right? All the different groups. How do we start to think about them comprehensively, but also in an individualized way that can help us move the dial? And that has happened. So in all the CSU campuses, graduation and persistence rates overall have increased substantially. But at CSUN, our equity gaps are pernicious. They continue to exist. And what I'm excited about is that our VP for Student Affairs, William Watkins, along with some other folks, has brought in a consultant firm that's actually helped us, is very targeted at how do we increase retention and graduation rates among our Black students, because that is, interestingly, CSUN admits and enrolls the largest number of Black students, but we do not graduate that same number. We are down the list in terms of the number of Black students that we graduate. And what we intend is that if we can address what's happening with our Black students, that learning can be extended to all of our student populations, and help us move the dial with student success.
The success you've been having, then you overlay COVID on this, and all of a sudden these face-to-face offices that are measuring the right things kind of goes away. So coming back to campus, what were the restarts that you said, okay, let's go back to doing this, or are there new things that you added to the portfolio of retention and graduation initiatives?
Well, I'll be curious to see what Dwayne's experience was, but at CSUN, one of the things that was very difficult for us is that when we came back from the pandemic, student volunteerism in all of the student affairs areas that depended on student volunteers to deliver programming dried up. We had very few students, and even now, even though we're now, 3 years away from the pandemic, volunteerism hasn't approached what it was pre-pandemic. And so, we have to instead, now we have to compensate students if we want them involved in the different initiatives that we have. One of those initiatives, and to answer your question, what did we bring back? And that is, near peer. And we were interested in this platform because we hadn't had a face-to-face engagement with students at least at CSUN, right? That didn't happen until the spring of 2022 is when we really had our first in-person major population come back. And so in that context, and you had transfer students that had been and still are primarily online, so they hadn't visited campus. So Near Peer provided a way for students that were almost exclusively virtual to connect together in a platform that was safe and allowed them to identify people who shared common experiences and interests with them. And so that piece was there. And then we matched that with what we call our peer mentoring, both in person as well as virtual. And those two components helped us not only with enrolling a class, but also what the data show us is that they're actually retaining at higher rates per term if they engage in these different opportunities that we're offering for students. The other piece that I think was interesting is we had a new provost come in. She was really interested in understanding the differential impacts of pedagogical approaches on the communities that we are struggling to retain at our campus. And she made a very brave decision and said, I'm going to publish all of the classes and faculty with higher DFW rates in our community, in our colleges. And then I'm also going to offer resources on how to help those faculty develop those skills to change the data trajectory of those outcomes. And so I think the combination of these new technologies, along with a provost that's been very clear about what she's trying to do relative to closing these gaps, and then finally the last thing I'll say is a huge investment in academic advising, both structurally and people. All of those pieces coming together to try to help us improve our outcomes in the next number of years.
One of the things that you read about pretty regularly is how hard it is to staff things. And I assume you have, well, maybe give an idea what your portfolio is for each of you within your enrollment management or enrollment services. And did you start this past fall fully staffed, and are you fully staffed now?
Well, when you say staffing, let me go back to a piece of your last question is post-pandemic. The pandemic hopefully taught us all something. And that is what we're doing right now. Never in my career, I've been in this game for over 30 years now, and never have I had this many Zoom meetings or whatever the platform was in those years and that time. Never have I been. So I spend my day, this is my third meeting in a row on camera sitting at my desk. And so we learned over that time that you can have engagement experiences virtually. As David said, Near Peer is a virtual experience. It's not an in-person experience. There are in-person experiences that can be birthed from that, but it's a virtual experience. And so we learned how to do that, and some learned how to do it well. So for orientation, for example, for our new students that come to our campus, our new student orientation, we have an in-person model and we have a virtual model online. And so we've learned that you can engage both ways, and we do. We do counseling online. We do a number of different things and ways that we engage our students both in person and online. And we're finding that our students are asking for that. And that's the one thing that we had to change, is to really learn what is it that our students are looking for. Our Associated Students Incorporated, our student body, they have their meetings, and now half of it is virtual. So they have the cameras up in the room and people are engaging from the community. So all of those spaces had to be there. So these hybrid experiences were important. But from an engagement standpoint, as we were coming back, David hit this on the head. We realized that during the pandemic, you had transfer students. When we had our first in-person graduation, of course, we had 1 year we couldn't have in-person commencements. When we had our first in-person commencement, we realized we had transfer students commencing that had never stepped foot on campus. And their commencement day was the first day. And we're not an online experience. We're not a University of Phoenix, right? So that's a different kind of experience for us. And so what we realized then in coming in, that when we were coming back to campus, we may need to offer campus tours to a student who's been here for 2 years, but this is their first time stepping foot on campus, or we may need to do some on-campus experiences. We created info desks. I stole this from you, David. Or you could say from me when I was there, but then you took over. but the information desk kind of hub center where a student can drop in and say, hey, ask any question in the world, we'll get you the answer. But we took it a step further. If anybody drops in, we created 2 centers on campus. Anybody drops in and asks any question at all, the student who is working there will walk you to your destination, and they won't let you go until you have your answer. That's important because 1, students haven't been here physically on campus, and we took that for granted. But 2, just the experience of you care, and you care enough about me that you're not just going to say, go down there and turn left and figure it out, and we'll see you later. So I think those kinds of things are important, and we do engage a large number. I think my division, so enrollment management in my area is in academic affairs. And I believe at this point, I think I employ the most students of any unit on campus, of any division on campus. I have a number of departments. And so having those students employed keeps them engaged and has that, we have the near peer product, but you also have the near peer physical experience as you have students helping students as well.
David, before you outsourced to near peer, had you an in-house version of this, trying to get new students together?
No. You know, I think the question you asked a second ago was, you know, what's our staffing level? That's ebbed and flowed over the course of since the pandemic. So some offices experienced significant loss and attrition that we're just now beginning to replace, and others sustained their portfolio of employees, but then it starts to fray at the edges. So, but in general, I would say we're 90 to 95% employed in terms of our staff. Because recruitment wasn't a part of the CSUN experience, outreach was, but not recruitment. So outreach is, hey, we want to tell you about CSUN. Here are all the things. Here's the system information. But you know, you're going to apply and we'll send you some information, but we're really not, we don't have territories assigned to counselors where they manage it very closely. Hey, I'm going to send these emails, these texts. I'm going to build relationship with all the people in my territory. That didn't exist, and and so it's beginning to exist. So there was no real focus on creating experiences for students to connect together either, right? So what we call yield, as you know, yield events that we create to help people get to know one another as they start to make a decision about whether to attend the institution or not. So near peer was really the first time that we kind of entered into this space in which, hey, we're going to provide a context and an environment where we're facilitating connection with students, and you know, one of the things that is offered in the near peer platform are, you know, campus groups can create groups, or campus departments can create groups within the near peer platform to connect with students as well. So no, there wasn't a in-person version of this that we replaced with near peer.
And was there any political about outsourcing this and going to get an outside company to do this politically or budgetarily?
Not at CSUN. There was, I think there was theoretical concerns. So so we have a platform that is designed with peer mentors. So you have student mentors, and it's virtual, that connects to incoming students. It's called Mentor Collective. And the concern was that offering near peer would dilute or would limit participation in the peer mentor platform. And so and what we argued was, well, they're serving two different purposes. One is connecting students to students so they can make friends. The other is, how do I navigate the institution in terms of registration and paying for tuition and getting a roommate, that kind of thing. And that is in part why we created the study that we did, was because in addition to the outcomes that we had articulated, enrollment and retention, we wanted to know, how did it affect the participation rates of Mentor Collective? And so there was a lot of conversation institutionally about, is this a good idea, because we already have something in place. And as it turns out, it actually increased participation rates in peer and Mentor Collective, because it really does serve a different purpose. The other thing that a couple of folks were, I think they wondered what would make a person or what would make an outcome like enrollment achievable if you're just giving students the opportunity to connect together and share hobbies. That was the articulation. Like, well, because it really does matter when you're coming, particularly when you're a commuter institution, right, where there's not a ready access point and ready community, like a residential campus. Well, I'm going to live in the dorm, so that's going to create this structure. Without that structure, you need something that connects students together. So.
You found similar, Dwayne?
Yeah, no, I was going to say that. So we're using near peer for newly enrolled students, and so we're looking at their experience and engagement upon entry, and then measuring that. And so we didn't have anything like that beforehand, and there was no issue of us bringing it in. We're a lower resourced campus. And so, if there's going to be a resource where the cost is not prohibitive and there can be high contact, and we don't have, we're staff challenged as well. So we're fully staffed, but we're just a smaller entity that hasn't grown in our staffing in terms of what some of our enrollment has increased. We haven't increased our staffing. So having something like this is a great resource for us. And I can say it's interesting how David talked about the mentoring piece. So we have in-person mentoring for new students who come in. We have a couple of different efforts where we have, staff to student mentoring, but we don't have peer-to-peer mentoring, one. And so recently I just got a call saying, hey, I know we're doing this near peer, but we also have this mentoring thing going on, and we have this other thing going on. And I said, well, the difference is that near peer is peer-to-peer. So we're not influencing that. We're not coming into the room. So it's like this social media experience between the students. And when you look at the communication chain, it's like, hey, is anybody having problems registering for this class, or is anybody having problems logging into their whatever? And someone saying, yeah, I got it. And another student says, I'm so nervous that school's about to start. Me too, but you got this. And that kind of organic exchange between students is highly valuable, and the data is beginning to show that. So we don't have spaces like that, and that creates that nice niche in that space.
So clearly you're observing this and you're lurking. Is this a moderated forum? I mean, would somebody interject an answer who was the man, or is strictly peer-to-peer, and then that gets into safety and all the rest of that?
So for us, near peer does monitoring on their end, but we do have someone who'll jump in every now and then. So for example, there was the students were asking a question about something admissions related. So
Mhm.
one of our admissions folks popped in and then listed some bulleted responses that said, do this, and do that. And if you have any questions, email us, and then jumped out.
Okay.
And their response stayed, so you can actually see the image there today, but they jumped out to almost have it as a space. So ironically, I actually did my dissertation in social media and college choice,
Uh-huh.
right? So as I was doing my work, and this is some time ago, but some of these still stand true, that there are certain spaces that students want to be their spaces. They don't
Right.
want old people in the room. Facebook isn't cool anymore because old people got in there and took it over. And so now they wanted to find new spaces. So TikTok became the thing. So as soon as David and I start doing TikTok videos, it's going to be over and young people will find something else to do. I say that to say this. In some spaces, students want to just be students. And yes, we want to keep it appropriate and all that. But yeah, give them their space. If they want to talk about the last anime cartoon they saw, or if they want to talk about whatever they want to talk about, they get this safe space, as David mentioned, to just be them and to be organic without feeling like, Big Brother or the man is watching over them, forcing them to give information or say certain things. So I think that balance is striked quite well to give them that space to do so, and they're thriving in it. They're enjoying it.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
100% agree with everything that Dwayne said. I think there's a couple pieces about the near peer platform that are important and I think contribute to creating that safe place. Number one, they're invited to participate in the near peer platform once, in our case, once they're admitted. So it's closed. It's a closed system. And number two, they cannot be anonymous. So it is you come in as David Dufault-Hunter. Those two things, I think, put people on notice that they have to behave because they can't just say something and no one knows who they are. The other piece is there's no video sharing or anything like that. So it is really just peer-to-peer, person-to-person communicating. And because it's positive, right? I'm looking for people like me who share the common interests, hobbies, experiences. You went to my high school, whatever. It also that positive, optimistic perspective creates this, I think, culture that I think is generally well behaved. The one of the pieces that's also available, as I mentioned, is that, for example, admissions can create a group. Students choose into that group, so we don't go out and select them. They go in and say, "Hey, okay, I have a question." They can answer. They can ask that question. Lots of people then get, as Dwayne said, the information or the answer to that question. So it is very organic, very gentle. And really we try to keep our hands off. There's an opportunity to send notifications, which we'll do, but we have to be very careful because, as Dwayne said, once you interject and infiltrate their space or invade their space, then they're less likely to enjoy it and use it as a place where they can connect together.
So logistically, when they're admitted, they get an institutional email account, and that's what allows them in? Or
Yeah,
they
so
do their own email?
we'll send them, and actually we do it all at once. So they get they are before they even say yes, we send all of the admitted student emails to near peer, so they exist. And then there's an email and a series of communication that goes out, including a video saying, "Hey, here's an opportunity for you," and then they click on a link and it admits them into the platform. They create a profile if they want. And then they can either use that profile to engage in a search match process, or they can search for specific variables that they're interested in finding people that match those variables.
And if a student withdraws in April, says I'm going elsewhere, do you remove them from the system?
We do.
And lastly, what are some metrics? Did you do A/B any of this to see about, comparing with something that didn't exist before, how do you assess this?
So, Dwayne, you mind if I just jump in here on this
Sure.
one?
Oh, go ahead.
So we weren't certain whether this would work. And as I mentioned, also we had competing platforms. So we actually engaged in a randomized control trial. So we designed an experimental study. So we at the point of deposit, we call them intents, but the point of deposit, we had basically 12,000 students, a mix of transfer students and first-time freshmen. We randomly assigned that group to two groups, so a mix of everybody. And then the treatment group was invited to near peer, and they moved through that process. And the other group received all of our other communication, but were not invited to participate in near peer. Now, what we found, and the reason that's important, right, is that some of the things that we measure in higher education is just a proxy for something else. So near peer could just be a proxy for people's just natural inclination to engage. And so both of those kinds of students exist in both groups, right? The treatment group and the control group. So if near peer made any difference, it should then, we'll see that in the data, meaning there'll be higher numbers of folks that enroll. If it doesn't, then it's more of a predictor than an intervention, right? Because then it's just it's serving as that proxy, as I mentioned. And what we found is that it absolutely had a significant impact on student enrollment, and in particular, transfer students and Black students. So transfer students were 25% more likely to enroll, and Black students were 50% more likely to enroll if they were in the treatment group. Not whether they were in the platform, but simply if they were in the treatment group versus the control group. And then, of course, we had significant differences if they comparing people who participated in the in near peer versus those who didn't. But this very conservative approach gave us confidence that, okay, it does have a positive impact on enrollment. And then we're continuing this study. So it's longitudinal. So we're tracking, does the impact of near peer continue to affect retention rates? And it has. So for those same populations, even more so. So from our perspective, near peer does have efficacy in creating the kind of connection between students that results in them feeling like this is a place where I can belong. And then as long as the institution has strategies that builds on that connection, then I think it will continue to have a lasting impact.
Great. Dwayne, are you finding similar results?
Absolutely. And I was going to say, David said it well. I don't have much to add to that. We measured some different things, but the measurements are showing very promising results in a very short period of time. So we measured melt rate, and for us, the data came back that our melt rate was 34% for students who did not use near peer versus 2% who did. And across the board, they showed the different ethnic groups and demographics, first gen and all that. So that's a significant find for us. When I got that data, I sent it to our president directly. And he said, we got to keep this thing, make sure we don't lose it. So just looking at how you can do that. And again, I want to emphasize, this is with very little effort on our part, because we don't have lots of staffing bandwidth to do things. So with little we do have, we can get in there and do some things that we do, but it's a huge help for us.
That's
great. Well, this has been good. I've learned a lot. If I were still in an institution, I'd consider this, but I appreciate you taking the time, and I think our viewers will also enjoy learning what the scale you have to deal with. I've never been at an institution as large as yours, so clearly making that large into a little more manageable, personable has yielded results. So keep up the good work.